So I have a question for you. How often have you looked up at the stars and wondered, wow, what's that all about? What are those stars about? Is that a planet over there? That bright one, is that a planet? Probably was. And you wonder what it's like to be in the stars. What are the stars about? The planets are about? Me too. So the history of astrology probably started thousands of years ago, because just like you, many people gazed up at the stars and wondered, wow, what are those things? What's going on between the planets and the Earth? And what's the relationship between the planets, the stars, and the Earth? So, the movements of the stars and the planets, it must have seemed like, wow, this is amazing. How is this happening? Why is this moving? This is before we knew that the Earth would move, right? So, not surprisingly, many people want to study about the stars and the planets. And Solon, the Greek historian, wrote the astronomical information that was being recorded 9,000 years before he was born. If this is correct, people have been interested in astrology for at least 11,000 years. So, pretty long time ago, huh? So we could say it's possible. Now, I'm talking about Western astrology again. It's possible astrology is probably the oldest form of divination in the world. So divination, what do I mean by divination in the world? Well, astrology is just like scrying water, tarot cards, all different types of ways of tuning in to certain energies. That's divination, tuning in. So different things I've done in my coursework, divination, the tools of divination, reading auras, psychic readings, tarot cards, scrying water, mirror gazing. These are all ways of tuning into the knowingness. And did you know that in the 17th century that astrology was looked at as for scholars, and it was commonly considered in political and social circles kind of highbrow, if you will. Isn't that interesting? I found that fascinating. So astrology began astronomy, which makes sense if you think about it. So astrology probably started back in Mesopotamia, way in Mesopotamia. Again, Western astrology. But almost every account of astrology in old ancient times, civilizations, they used the stars and planets from Babylon, Egypt, and China. Greece, of course, studied it. And early astrologers noted that the most groups of the stars, the brightest parts of these stars, were known as constellations. They would call them constellations. So the constellations moved around the sky together. They noticed there was always a formation that moved the same way together. However, 5 of the larger and brighter stars traveled independently from those others. So they used to call them the wanderers. Today we know them as the planets. And usually the brightest stars that you see are the planets. So they noticed that the planets would move differently than the groups of stars. So these wanderers, or they would call them, the Greeks, of course, had names for them, and they would call them Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, and Uranus. So that's where the names came from. And they also noticed that the movements of the sun and the moon factor very significantly into understanding how astrology works. And it really goes to the basics of astrology.